Top 10 Samurai Duels That Shaped Japanese History, Part 3. The year was 1582. Oda Nobunaga, the first great unifier of Japan, had nearly succeeded in ending the chaotic warring states period when treachery struck from within his inner circle. What followed was a power struggle embodied in a legendary confrontation between two of his most trusted generals, Shibata Katsui and Akechi Mitsuhide. While historical records don't document a direct one-on-one duel between these two commanders on the battlefield, contemporary accounts speak of a decisive personal confrontation at Kiyosu Castle shortly before Mitsuhide's fateful decision to betray Nobunaga. This tense exchange, filled with veiled threats and challenges, represented the ideological battle that would ultimately change Japan's destiny. Shibata Katsui was the embodiment of old samurai values, loyal, direct, and fierce. A veteran who had served Nobunaga from the beginning, he advocated for traditional military approaches and had little patience for political subtlety. Akechi Mitsuhide, conversely, represented a new kind of samurai, educated, politically astute, and pragmatic to the point that some would later call opportunistic. According to records from the period, their confrontation occurred during a war council where Mitsuhide subtly challenged Katsui's military judgment. Witnesses described how the aging Katsui grasped his sword hilt in anger, while Mitsuhide responded with a calm hand on his own weapon, neither man drawing but both clearly threatening violence. What made this moment so tense was that both men knew that whoever Nobunaga sided with would likely become his successor. When Nobunaga appeared to favor Mitsuhide's strategies over Katsui's, something broke in the delicate balance of power. Within weeks, Mitsuhide would make his infamous move, surrounding Nobunaga at Honnoji Temple and forcing the great warlord to commit suicide. The historical significance of this rivalry cannot be overstated. Had Katsui prevailed in this political duel of wills, Mitsuhide might never have betrayed Nobunaga, potentially changing the entire course of Japanese unification. Instead, Mitsuhide's betrayal created a power vacuum that would eventually be filled by Toyotomi Hideyoshi, leading Japan down a different historical path altogether. Their ideological battle, tradition versus innovation, straightforward loyalty versus political calculation, reflected the changing nature of warfare and politics in late 16th century Japan. As firearms were transforming battlefields and centralized authority was replacing feudal autonomy, their conflict represented Japan's struggle to define what it meant to be a samurai in changing times. The aftermath proved equally significant. After Mitsuhide's betrayal and Nobunaga's death, Katsui and Toyotomi Hideyoshi would compete for succession, culminating in the Battle of Shizugatake, where Hideyoshi's victory would secure his position as Japan's next great unifier. The ripples from this pivotal confrontation would continue to shape Japanese politics for generations. Sometimes, the most important duels in history are the ones that don't take place. In 1868, as Japan stood on the precipice of civil war, two legendary samurai faced each other in a Kyoto garden. Saigo Takamori, the fearsome military leader of the imperial forces, and Katsu Kaishu, the brilliant naval strategist serving the Tokugawa shogunate. Saigo came to the meeting prepared for conflict, reportedly carrying orders to assassinate Katsu if negotiations failed. Katsu arrived unarmed, betting his life on his powers of persuasion. The stakes couldn't have been higher. The future of Japan hung in the balance. The Tokugawa shogunate that had ruled Japan for over 260 years was crumbling. Imperial forces had already seized Kyoto, and Saigo was preparing to march on Edo, modern Tokyo, the shogun's capital. Such an attack would almost certainly trigger a devastating civil war. What followed wasn't a clash of swords, but a battle of ideas and visions for Japan's future. For hours, the two men debated. Saigo, known as the Last Samurai, represented traditional Japanese values and the restoration of imperial power. Katsu, who had studied Western naval science and traveled to America, embodied Japan's modernizing faction that recognized the need to engage with the outside world. Contemporary accounts describe how Katsu's eloquence and strategic thinking gradually softened Saigo's hardline position. By the end of their meeting, instead of crossing swords, they had forged an unprecedented agreement. The shogun would surrender Edo Castle peacefully to imperial forces, avoiding the destruction of Japan's greatest city and saving countless lives. This duel of words had more impact on Japanese history than any sword fight could have. The peaceful surrender of Edo allowed Japan to transition into the Meiji era without destroying its economic and cultural center. It preserved much of Japan's cultural heritage while enabling the rapid modernization that would transform the nation into a world power within decades. The confrontation between these two samurai represented the larger struggle within Japan between tradition and modernization, between resistance to the West and strategic adaptation. In choosing words over weapons, they demonstrated a form of Bushido, the way of the warrior, that transcended battlefield courage, the wisdom to know when not to fight. Both men would go on to play crucial roles in the new Japan. Though ironically, Saigo would later lead the Satsuma Rebellion against the very government he helped establish, when he felt it was abandoning traditional samurai values too quickly. Katsu, meanwhile, would help build Japan's modern navy, laying the foundation for the country's emergence as a naval power. At the top of our countdown is a confrontation that embodies the transition from feudal Japan to the modern nation we know today. In 1862, two swordsmen from Tosa Domain faced off in what began as a traditional duel, but evolved into something that would help reshape Japan forever. Sakamoto Ryoma and Takechi Hanpeta had once been friends and fellow members of the Tosa Loyalist Party, dedicated to expelling foreigners and restoring the emperor to power. But their paths diverged dramatically when Ryoma developed a more progressive worldview after traveling to Yokohama and seeing Western technology firsthand. Their ideological split came to a head when Ryoma proposed that Japan should learn from the West rather than reject it outright. Takechi, a traditionalist who firmly believed in Japan's isolation policy and the samurai's privileged position, viewed this as betrayal. According to domain records, Takechi challenged Ryoma to a duel to settle their philosophical differences. What makes this confrontation unique in samurai history is what happened next. Rather than accept the challenge, Ryoma did something revolutionary. He left his domain without permission, an illegal act for a samurai, and traveled to Edo to pursue his vision of a modernized Japan. This dual avoidance was not cowardice, but strategy. Ryoma understood that Japan's future would not be determined by swordsmanship, but by political alliances and modernization. He chose to channel his samurai spirit into national transformation rather than personal combat. The historical impact was immense. Free from domain restrictions, Ryoma went on to broker the alliance between the powerful Satsuma and Choshu domains, a partnership that eventually toppled the Tokugawa shogunate. He established Japan's first modern corporation, drafted early versions of Japan's constitution, and advocated for a democratic parliament based on Western models. Takechi, meanwhile, continued leading the traditionalist movement in Tosa, organizing what would later be called the Tosa Kino Party. His activities eventually led to his arrest and forced suicide in 1865, cutting short what might have been a powerful opposing voice during Japan's transition. The significance of this duel that never was cannot be overstated. Had Ryoma accepted the traditional challenge, he might have died or remained trapped in provincial politics. Instead, his decision to break with samurai tradition allowed him to become one of the most influential architects of modern Japan, even though he would be assassinated in 1867, just months before the Meiji Restoration he helped make possible. Their ideological confrontation represented the ultimate question facing Japan. Would the nation cling to its isolated past or embrace a new future among the world powers? Ryoma's vision eventually prevailed, transforming Japan from a feudal society into a modern industrial nation within a single generation. As we've seen through these 10 legendary confrontations, samurai duels were far more than simple tests of swordsmanship. They were pivotal moments where philosophy, politics, and personal honor converged to shape the course of Japanese history. From battlefield encounters between great generals to quiet moments of defiance that changed political trajectories, these duels embody the complexity and depth of samurai culture. They remind us that for the samurai, the sword was not merely a weapon, but a means of expressing one's innermost principles. The legacy of these duels extends far beyond ancient Japan. The philosophical concepts tested in these confrontations, strategy versus strength, tradition versus innovation, resistance versus adaptation, continue to resonate in modern business, politics, and martial arts. For Americans viewing these stories from across the Pacific, there are striking parallels to our own historical turning points, where individual decisions and confrontations, from the duel between Hamilton and Burr to the debates between Lincoln and Douglas, altered the nation's course. The way of the samurai may seem distant from our modern world of technology and global connections, but the essential questions these warriors faced remain eerily relevant. How do we balance tradition with progress? When should we stand firm? And when should we adapt? What principles are worth fighting or even dying for? In today's world, where battles are often fought with words, economic policy, or digital code rather than swords, the strategic wisdom and philosophical depth displayed in these historical duels still offer valuable lessons. Perhaps that's why samurai culture continues to fascinate us centuries after the last true samurai laid down his sword. These 10 duels, each in its own way, didn't just decide the fates of individual warriors. They helped forge the soul of a nation that would eventually rise from isolation to become one of the world's great powers. And in their echoes, we might find wisdom for navigating our own pivotal moments of conflict and transformation. Thank you for watching this exploration of the top 10 samurai duels that shaped Japanese history. If you enjoyed this journey through Japan's rich martial heritage, please consider subscribing to our channel and hitting the like button. For more fascinating stories from Japanese history and culture, check out our other videos. Until next time, sayonara.